Explain Like I'm Five. Why does USA have military bases and soldiers in many foreign countries? This isn't the only reason, but a lot of countries like the US military presence. For example, Poland knows that the US is unlikely to attempt a takeover of Poland, no matter how assured a US victory would be. But Poland is pretty sure Russia would if they had even half a chance at success. So Poland is perfectly happy to host the US military in order to deter Russia. The US has strategic reasons for not wanting Russia to take over Europe, so they are happy to have a base there. Right, in the vast majority of cases, it's either they asked for it or they're paid for it. One big reason is that much of the world has allowed the United States to take on a large portion of their defense in exchange for allowing us to station troops there. For instance, of the 32 members of NATO, only about 5 reach the required threshold of spending 2% of their GDP on defense. Most of them have allowed the US to take the burden of defense in exchange for not having to spend that money. Similarly, Japan, since WW2 is mostly demilitarized and relies on the US for defense. This is largely a win-win situation for all sides, as it allows the US to project power across the globe and keep its allies in line with its strategic objectives, and the other countries don't need to keep large standing armies and stockpiles. Plus, it's largely contributed to the lack of conflict in the Western world and the lack of major wars in the last century. Without standing armies to wage wars, countries aren't as bellicose. One reason the Korean War has never reignited is the commitment of the US to defend South Korea from any future incursions from the north. North Korea might be able to take South Korea one-on-one, but there's no way it could bear the brunt of the full US military. Other countries like Djibouti, who aren't in our network of mutual defense alliances but are strategically located, can trade military basing rights for economic or political advantages. And regimes who allow America to station troops in their country give America a stake in keeping them in power, making coups or revolts less likely to succeed. Similarly, Japan, since WW2 is mostly demilitarized and relies on the US for defense. While historically true and to some degree still enforced by Article 9 of their constitution, the JSDF is a major power militarily, even if they don't do much force projection. They typically rank somewhere in the top 10 militaries by strength. Their navy, for instance, has over 150 ships, including 4 carriers, 2 of which can fly F-35s. From what I can find, their defense expenditure is in the same ballpark as South Korea or France. Others will likely mention that this goes along with the US's power projection philosophy and as part of the role of being a superpower. However, for the countries the US has bases in, it's also often less expensive to invite in the Americans, replete with perks, geopolitical or otherwise, rather than funding a large military of their own. This is really interesting. It's amazing how the presence of US military bases can have such a big impact on international relations and security. It's like a big chess game, with different countries strategically positioning themselves to protect their own interests. And the idea that some countries actually want the US military there as a form of protection against other potential threats is really eye-opening. It's like a big global partnership for security. I never realized how interconnected it all is. So, why do you think some countries are okay with relying on the US for defense instead of investing in their own military? And do you think the presence of US military bases in other countries actually helps to maintain stability and peace in the long run? Let me know in the comments down below, and let's move right into our next Reddit post. Explain Like I'm Five. Why aren't football stadiums in colder climates always designed as a closed dome? For example, when the Green Bay Packers built their stadium, they had to have known it would constantly be snowing. Same with Kansas City Chiefs. A. Money. Domes are quite a bit more expensive. B. Structural concerns as well. Not every place can physically support a dome. For instance, Cleveland said that the current stadium location could not support a dome. It'd weigh too much and cause the stadium to sink. C. There's definitely some identity element to it as well, as seen by Green Bay and Buffalo fans. Some people like the cold. B. Part 2. Can you imagine the weight on that roof if it had Buffalo-level snow on it? That thing would need to be so strong. Lambeau Field, home of the Packers, was built in 1957. The first domed stadium in the NFL was built in 1968. They just weren't building indoor football stadiums when the Packers built their stadium. Part of the ambiance of Green Bay is that you brave the elements when you play there, giving them an advantage against the teams from warmer climates, and the fans and owners love it. Kansas City is in an extremely unique stadium that the fans love. Not everyone wants perfect 70-degree weather and no wind for games. It should also be noted that both Green Bay, Lambeau, and Kansas City Arrowhead fields are heated from below, so the field isn't frozen hard. This makes it so the game can be played relatively the same. Players can still run fast and get hit hard without increased injury risk. Not all outdoor fields have this. Chicago's Soldier Field is rock hard in the winter, one of the worst stadiums in the league. I don't think Buffalo's field is heated either, but could be wrong. This topic is very interesting and raises a lot of good points. I can see why some people might prefer to have open-air stadiums in colder climates, especially when it comes to the identity and ambiance of the team. It's cool to learn that some of these stadiums are actually heated from below to keep the field playable during the winter. And the idea of the weight of a dome with buffalo-level snow on it is mind-blowing. I had no idea about the history of domed stadiums and how they weren't really being built when the older stadiums, like Lambeau Field, were constructed. It's also surprising to hear that some places like Cleveland can't physically support a dome due to structural concerns. There's just so much to consider when it comes to stadium design and location. So why do you think some fans and teams prefer outdoor stadiums in colder climates, despite the challenges that come with it? Do you think the ambiance and natural playing conditions play a big factor in this preference? Let me know in the comments down below, and let's move right into our next Reddit post. Explain like I'm 5. What is the natural way to die? I mean, if you don't die from a heart attack or something. If you die from aging, how do you die? Do you just stop breathing? There is no dying of old age. You die because your organs stopped working properly. As for what stopped working, there are a lot of possibilities. Your heart might suddenly just jolt in its place, you suddenly get a huge blood clot in your brain during your sleep, your brain aneurysm pops because of the thinning of blood vessels due to age, etc. Aging itself is the proof of cellular damage. So basically, when you die of old age, it's simply a lot of your cells stopped working properly, which can lead to a chain reaction of organ failure. So that means if you had unlimited access to organs, you could just keep replacing the messed up ones and never die? When I saw my grandmother in her final years, she was going out like a candle. A candle at its end, it's very small, and then it flickers a bit until at some undefined point, it's out. Parts of her just stopped working. She became almost blind and deaf. In the final year, she could barely walk anymore. She talked in single-word sentences. Her brain was still there, but it was pulling energy from all over, like one of those runaway AIs from a 90s Saturday cartoon. The only thing that didn't stop was her love for her family. She almost died. She hadn't eaten in days and barely left the bed. But when we all came to say our goodbyes, for some reason, she found some energy to continue living for another few months. She started eating again, and we could have one last party together. One day, she just didn't wake up. No heart attack, no thrombosis, no weird fall, lung infection, or anything. There was no autopsy because it didn't matter. She was just done. All her energy was spent. To me, that sounds like old age. A lot of people do rally just before the end. It's one of the better signs in hospice to tell when it's about time. The body stops fighting and lets you do your one last time. When your cells get old, they lose the ability to heal and reproduce themselves. After a while, you have too few good cells to function. This eventually causes organ failure. My granddad had congestive heart failure, which, as I understand it, means his heart just became less and less efficient at pumping blood over quite a long period of time. That can lead to all sorts of possible fatal complications, but they all come down to your heart being gradually tired out. When I hear died of old age, that's immediately what my mind goes to. Ultimately, you die when your heart stops unless you get life support in time. It doesn't just randomly decide, that's it, I quit. Most of the time, if an autopsy is done, it's a heart attack. People can get one even with no specific complaints before they go to bed and could have woken up and noticed the pain before the heart stopped. People also can get a clot that stops their brain from getting oxygen. Some types of cancer can be ignored, commonly lung cancer, where people die thinking their coughing is just the usual daily pain they're used to. This is really interesting. It's fascinating to learn about the different ways that aging can lead to the body's organs eventually stopping to function. It's also quite poignant to hear about the experiences people have had with their loved ones reaching the end of their lives. It's a reminder of the natural cycle of life and how the body eventually wears out over time. So, when we talk about dying of old age, it's not a specific cause like a heart attack or a brain clot, but rather a combination of our cells and organs simply wearing out. It's almost like a candle burning until it finally flickers out. The thought that our bodies just reach a point of exhaustion and can no longer function properly, leading to death, is both sobering and thought-provoking. I'm curious to know more about the different ways the body can shut down due to old age. Is it a gradual process, or can it happen suddenly? And how does the body know that it's reached the end, leading to what's often referred to as dying of old age? Well, that's another episode of Explain Like I'm 5 in the books. I really appreciate all of you who made it this far into the video. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, it would really help the channel out a lot if you gave the video a thumbs up, subscribe, or leave a comment down below. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.